Hello folks, and welcome to this Supreme Court case overview video. In this video, we're just going to be tackling one case, Marbury versus Madison, and it's often considered to be the first landmark Supreme Court case. That is, the first court case that we really remember as a core part of our historical development of policy and the understanding of the Constitution. And this one, as complicated as it is, really is a big one. So let's dive right in. First and foremost, this is probably connected to your understanding of the Supreme Court in general. It's a rather meta Supreme Court case, isn't it? It's a Supreme Court case all about the Supreme Court. And to understand it, we need to go all the way back to Federalist 78, where Alexander Hamilton argued that the Supreme Court, in theory, has this power of judicial review. And judicial review is sort of like this super veto, where anything that violates the Constitution, the Supreme Court is the final judge and gets to wipe it out. But this is rather tricky. As mentioned by many early political figures, the Supreme Court has no army. The Supreme Court is not elected. In many ways, they seem rather illegitimate. When the Supreme Court started out, they met in a basement room of Congress. They didn't even wear the black robes. The Supreme Court is weak at its core. It's today 9 people who, well, usually they're old and they can't enforce their decisions over the other branches or even the states. You see, the Supreme Court needs the other branches to enforce its ruling. So how did we come to a system where we see the judicial branch as legitimate and we see their use of this power of judicial review as legitimate? Well, it all comes back to this rather complicated case, Marbury versus Madison. What happened is very political, so we'll try to give you the short and sweet version and what you would really need to know for the AP Gov test. So in 1800 or so, and it would reach the Supreme Court about 1803, and essentially how it went down was like this. We have a president, John Adams. He's the second president. He does not win re-election. He is replaced by Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson's Secretary of State is James Madison. Now, John Adams meant to appoint a few judges before he left office. He had the papers, which were commissions, papers that were meant to be delivered. But his term ran up, the clock struck midnight, he had to leave. In comes James Madison, the new, presumably, Secretary of State, and he chooses not to deliver these commissions. So now there's an issue. Some previous president did this, he meant to do it, now there's a new president, do they have to do this thing? And it's all very complicated, but it's a question of, now that this is being sued and litigated and run through the courts, can the Supreme Court force the executive branch to do something, right? And it's a rather interesting question because Congress had passed a law all the way back in 1789. The first Congress had passed a law saying that the Supreme Court could force members of the executive branch to do things such as deliver papers if there was a constitutional interest at stake. And so now we can imagine the difficult spot that the Supreme Court, led by Chief Justice John Marshall, is in. Their dilemma is something like this. They are Federalists. They were all appointed by John Adams' Federalist government, everyone on the Supreme Court. And if they force this other group, the Democratic Republicans, their enemies, run by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, if they force them to do something with a ruling, well, maybe they're just not going to do it, right? Maybe Thomas Jefferson and James Madison are going to say, that's your ruling, but we're not going along with it. Remember, the Supreme Court can't enforce their rulings. So I'm sure John Marshall and the other Federalists on the Supreme Court wanted to force James Madison to deliver the papers, but their hands are tied. And what they do is very, very clever. They find a way to assert their power while also keeping their enemies happy. More specifically, they say, actually, it's okay that you didn't deliver the commission because the act that says that we can force you to deliver the papers, the Judiciary Act of 1789, is unconstitutional. It gives us powers that the Constitution does not give us. And what's more important, an act of Congress or the Constitution? Well, of course, the Constitution. Did you catch that? It's okay if you didn't. At its core, what the Supreme Court is doing is they're using judicial review. They're playing the political game. They're looking at a law passed by Congress, and they're saying that law is void. It's gone forever. This case is significant because it is the first use of judicial review. Soak that in for a moment. Since 1800, we've had many, many uses of judicial review. And for almost every one of them, the other branches or the states or whatever policymaker or actor we're talking about has gone along with it. And it's all because of this case where the Supreme Court injected itself into the political process and asserted its right that Alexander Hamilton said it had all the way back in the Federalist Papers in Federalist 78. What do you really need to know? You absolutely must recognize that Marbury versus Madison is the first use of judicial review. So how could this show up on the AP test for that FRQ about Supreme Court cases? How could you be asked to apply this case? Well, one of the core vocabulary words associated with Marbury versus Madison in the chapter on the Supreme Court as a whole is jurisdiction. See, the Supreme Court said this was not an original jurisdiction case, that actually it could not come up to the Supreme Court like this, that Marbury could not sue for his commission by going straight to the Supreme Court. They had to go to lower courts first. And so what this is really getting at is issues of who gets to hear the case. Is it a lower court? Is it a Supreme Court? And oftentimes the Supreme Court will get a case and then decide, we're going to send it back to the lower courts. And if you still can't figure it out, come back here. That happens actually quite frequently because there are still to this day some debates over jurisdiction. Secondly, probably the more likely one, in this case, a rather broad sense, consider it. The Supreme Court did not force the government to do something. We could contrast that with a great deal of cases, even something like the Richard Nixon versus United States case, which you know associated with the Watergate scandal. In that case, the Supreme Court did force the president and his advisors to turn over tapes and recordings that proved they had spied and sort of done corrupt things against the Democratic Party. Now, in that case, the Supreme Court did force the government to do something. So you might get a question that hints at the differences between the Supreme Court forcing action and the Supreme Court not forcing action. Folks, it's a rather complicated case, but as long as you remember those core details about the ways in which this created and solidified the power of judicial review, I think you're going to be just fine. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.